some people are finally starting to give Penn State the respect that they deserve going into this season. And it still might not be enough.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked on to Penn State football, and as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day, your daily source for all things Penn State sports. My name is Zach Sako, and I am your host of the show, credentialed media member for both Penn State football and Penn State wrestling, and very privileged to welcome on a special guest, one of the most accurate, the number one in accuracy when it comes to college football over the course of a decade. He is the founder, creator of Pick Six Previews. Brett Ciancia is joining us to talk about Penn State in depth. Drew Allar, position groups that stand out for better and for worse. Today's show is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. As always, let us know your thoughts down in the comments section. Brett, we're going to start with Penn State, generally speaking, because I've seen some people that they say Penn State's overrated. We can all confidently agree that they're going to be in the mix, that they're going to compete for the Big Ten. They're going to be able to go up against Ohio State. They're going to compete for a national championship. But Brett, where do you actually have Penn State sitting? Are they the number one overall team, or are they still kind of on the outside looking in?
Yeah, Zach, well, thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate the intro. And yeah, I'm going to throw some fuel onto that hype train for you. I've got Penn State winning the Big Ten. I've got them entering as the number one overall team in the country on the big board here entering 2025. And really, there's a lot to like, and we'll get into the specifics of it. But on a high level, it's a very veteran team, fresh off a Final Four appearance, two of the best coordinators in the game. And we can go position by position and break it down. But it is a packed roster of future pros. And I think that they're catching Ohio State and Oregon in transitional type seasons where they're still very talented, but very young at Ohio State and Oregon. So I'm going with the veteran pick, Penn State. And I think this is their 1 year window here, a special opportunity to go through and win the Big Ten and proceed into the playoffs.
Now, how much further ahead are they? Because there's still plenty of talent. I understand when the AP top 25 or the coaches poll, Texas or Ohio State being ranked above, especially because you're the defending national champion. But that was last season. This is this season. So Julian Sayin takes over, and I know that they still got a ton of weapons. Of course, Jeremiah Smith, but they're also going to have three other reliable options for Julian Sayin to really settle into. Ohio State's going to be Ohio State, but I agree in the sense that Penn State is following the blueprint that the Buckeyes did a season ago. And the same thing with Michigan in 2023, that they had this veteran team. They got all of these players to come back rather than go to the NFL and build out this core that had been through that heartbreak the season before and understand what it took to get to the next level. But the point being that how is Penn State, is this a razor thin margin, or is there actually a little bit of a gap between Ohio State, Oregon, and some of these other top tier teams?
Yeah, well, you're right that it's following a pattern, and that's what first drew me to Penn State as a national champion type pick. Back in January, after the playoffs wrapped up, it was that decision time to go pro or not, and most of the guys came back. I mean, that backfield, the pair of running backs with Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton, they both could have gone pro. Drew Allar was getting some pro grades. And then on defense, I think 5 of their 10 all-conference guys are back, and I'm sure some of those could have gone pro. But so that followed suit along with now a second-year coordinator bonus with Andy Kotelnicki. I love getting a coordinator in a second year. And then to put the cherry on top as they go and steal the best defensive coordinator in the game from Ohio State. So then to answer your question about is there a gap at the top? Not really to me. I think it is a 3-team race with Penn State, Ohio State, Oregon. They're all very similar profiles in terms of power ratings for me. They're all going to be in that top 6, top 7. So you're kind of fine tuning it there. But here in August, what I like is a more veteran team and a more proven team. I know Ohio State and Oregon may have some higher upsides for 2026, but for this specific year, I like Penn State and what they've got. So I do also like that Penn State draws Oregon early in that whiteout. We just talked about it off air, but that whiteout atmosphere is going to be incredible. I'm a Pennsylvanian. I'm from Westchester, and just getting up there to see it. I want to go see a whiteout here. So, but anyway, you catch Oregon in late September, they're going to still be a new team there. A lot of, I think, 18, 19 new starters. So you catch them at a good time. So I think that's going to be a W for Penn State, and they'll probably go 11-1, or if not undefeated, heading into the playoff.
Well, timing's certainly everything, and let's highlight Oregon specifically because Penn State is going to meet them early on and catch them in an ideal spot. But game 4 for Penn State, I guess week 5 in the scheme of things, isn't going to define Oregon as a team, because I do believe that in the second half of the season, if they get things really clicking, Dante Moore, has played college football, and then he took a back seat to Dillon Gabriel. All that time, all of that experience was valid, but you still have to go through the motions. You still have to go through some more of that adversity. If Penn State matches up with Oregon again, is the gap going to be closed, or is Penn State still because of what they have, going to be out in front and considered? Because I think they're going to win decisively against the Ducks initially, but maybe that matchup doesn't go the same way that second time around, hypothetically.
That's a real fair point. And you could also use Oregon-Ohio State's series of games last year as another example in the other direction, because Oregon beat them at home, beat Ohio State there back in October. And then when they rematched, later in the year in December in the playoff bracket, Ohio State came in a lot more advanced, more developed. They were basically an NFL machine by that point, and you saw the two different outcomes. So I think Penn State and Oregon, they're both going to improve as the season goes on, but I think you'll see Oregon improve at a faster clip just because it's so young to start out, and you tend to see these players gain, to grow as a team as they get more starts together and gel as a unit. So definitely they're going to improve with Oregon. What stood out to me with Oregon too is just the caliber of athlete that they're bringing in there is unmatched. It's if you look at recruiting and transfer rankings, a lot of times it's based off quantity. The bigger classes are rated higher, but if you go per player for a real average, the quality, they were number 1 in both high school recruiting and number 1 in transfers last year. So they have a really, really high caliber of player. I wrote in the book here, they're my national title pick, but in 2026. I think that next year is really the year for Oregon. But to your point, they could still develop into a almost national champion caliber by December, January. So if you're meeting in Indianapolis for a Big Ten rematch or somewhere in the bracket, you're going to get a really tough team.
And all things considered, right? Players stay healthy. Just to throw that out there for everybody. But right, if Dante Moore stays at quarterback, they already took a hit with their leading returning receiver in Evan Stewart. So, and then the same thing goes for Penn State circumstantially. I think the same thing we just said with Oregon also applies to Ohio State with, again, you're breaking in a new starting quarterback, you're breaking in a new play caller, first-time offensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator. It's all that change that, the opponents, the juggernauts from a season ago, took a step backwards, and Penn State isn't going through. Andy Kotelnicki, as you mentioned, first-year offensive coordinator with Penn State, first year of a relationship with Drew Allar, and really started to tap into that potential, which we are going to get into the upcoming segment. But Brett, let's finish with this. We focused on the Big Ten, Ohio State and Oregon primarily as those threats to Penn State for the supremacy here. But they're going to have to go through a postseason where they're going to face potentially, maybe it's Georgia, maybe it's Notre Dame again. Maybe it's Alabama as one of those teams that, hey, they're young, but they got a ton of potential. Clemson returns a lot of talent and has very similar traits to this Penn State team. Is there one team that I mentioned in particular, maybe it's somebody that I didn't mention, that's going to be the biggest threat in a hypothetical 12-team college football playoff?
I think you look at those giants from the SEC, and these are the recruiters every year that are bringing in 5-star talent at every position. They're deep. They have some of the most NFL prospects, and that's two you mentioned with Alabama and Georgia. But also, I'll throw Texas into the mix too. I think they're knocking on that door as being on that dynasty tier, as I call it. Back-to-back Final Four appearances. They matched up with Ohio State just similarly to how Penn State matched up with Ohio State last year. Really tough game. Now you take over with Arch Manning, a little bit different, brings some mobility to the offense that Quinn Ewers didn't have. Of course, he's younger and newer, but I think their upside is really high. So for biggest threats to Penn State outside the league, I think you got to hone in on the SEC, and it's those three powerhouse teams at Texas, Bama, Georgia. Two of them breaking in new quarterbacks. I'll call Arch Manning a returner because we saw him a bunch. But at Bama and Georgia, new starting quarterbacks, so that's a question. But you got to like the rest of the roster talent there at all three spots.
Makes a ton of sense, especially since the college football, the landscape is shifting more towards a power 2 and away from the dynamic of the power 4, power 5 as it was. It's really the Big Ten and the SEC, at least for this present moment. So now let's hyper-focus on one player in particular, Drew Allar. People aren't bought it. Drew Allar's overrated. He's overhyped. He's going to disappoint everybody again. I beg to differ. Let's see if Brett agrees. That's coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And today's show is brought to you by Monarch Money. Do you ever wish managing your money felt easier? Well, with Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center where you can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. And for someone like myself, wants to grow a savings account, have more money for investments, being able to track spending is huge. So knowing where, maybe I'm dining out too much, too many package deliveries, right? I get to track all of those purchases and keep my finances in order. And if you want to manage money with a partner, significant other, it is great because Monarch Money is more than just individual planning as well. So if you have joint accounts and everything else, Monarch Money helps you manage that. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for, get this, 50% off your first year. That's right, 50% off your first year over at monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. So now Drew Allar specifically, he has the intangibles. He has the tools to be one of the top quarterbacks, maybe even the top quarterback selected in next year's NFL draft. That is objectively true that he possesses NFL traits, but this isn't about the NFL draft cycle and everything like that. I want people to understand that Allar still does have raw talent, but it's about converting that raw talent into actual production, because we really did see when the spotlight was at its brightest where he really got in his own head. And for somebody that I say, well, he has the throw power, he has the accuracy, sure, his footwork could use, a little, but he has his decision making, for the most part, is very solid. I mean, 10 turnovers and 10 interceptions in 2 seasons, full year starting. That's impressive. But Allar has gotten in his head at times against these bigger opponents, these bigger games. And in the college football semifinal, missing throws that, well, if he's an NFL prospect, he shouldn't be missing those. So it's not really about the athletic ability. It's about having the confidence in himself. And Brett, I think that adversity honestly helps him more than it hinders him going into the season, because now he's experienced that.
Yeah, I'm high on Drew Allar. I agree with a lot with what you were saying there. When I go on national shows and maybe Ohio State or opponent shows, they are really critical of Drew Allar, and I think they have that lasting image of the final pass against Notre Dame. And of course, his worst throw of the season, bad decision there. And maybe that was some coaching. Maybe you really over communicate what you're supposed to do in that situation. But regardless, that's really the lasting memory amongst the college football nation, really. But yeah. I try and say, hey, it's been a solid 2 seasons. If you look back at it, solid QB rating, 49 touchdowns to 10 picks. For the most part, pretty good decision making. And then also add in, it was the first year in a coordinator change there with kotelnicki, and I think you're going to see huge gains. You already saw gains last year in terms of explosive passes, explosive plays for the offense. Even my game grader formulas had them really high, top 10 in all the offensive categories. So I think it's going to be great again. You're going to get even more advanced with the second year of kotelnicki. A lot of talent around Allar is back, and I think they boosted the receiver room enough to give them a shot. How much of it was really Allar's mistakes, or how much was it a receiver room that couldn't separate at all? So it's tough when you compare a player, because football is a team game. You got to have all the other parts around him to compare. So all that to say, I think he enters 2025 as my first team All Big Ten quarterback. I trust what I have with him and this offense. Meanwhile, there's question marks at other programs at quarterback. So I like what they have. And, I think it's unfair to just look at the final throw that he threw against Notre Dame. I do think he's got to hit more of those layups that we talk about, those wide open guys in the flats, or maybe a wide open guy streaking down the field. Missed a couple of those in the playoffs. So maybe just hit the layups. But I think he's on par for really good performance this year.
Well, let me piggyback off of that in 2 measures, because you talk about, I think Penn State's biggest strength this season is the quantity and the diversity of talent that they have. Because for the past 2 years when Allar has been playing, you had the one superstar in Tyler Warren. Okay, and that's great. And you see why Penn State fed him the football, not only as a pass catcher, but as a literally as a quarterback, as a running back, you name it. Just get the football in Tyler Warren's hands. You can only win so many football games that way. And they still got to the semifinal. They still got to the semifinal when their offensive identity was, how can we get Tyler Warren the football as much as humanly possible? And they still made it to the Final Four. Okay, so now you don't have Tyler Warren, but now you get, as you said, Amari Evans, Trey Wallace, Keandre Lambert-Smith, those guys over the course of 2 seasons, okay, they were good. They were good football players, but to an extent. They could get open against West Virginia. They could get open against Purdue. They could get open against, right, those opponents that, you know, you can make some mistakes and you overcome those mistakes because they're good, decent teams, but they're not great. They're not elite. The second you faced Michigan in its prime, Ohio State, Notre Dame, top 5 defenses, all those receivers disappeared. And so now you have a trio of wide receivers that all possess different skill sets. And you know, Brett, feel free to back up or disagree with me in the fact that Trevor Pena doesn't need all these intense schematics just to get him to break open. He can win his one-on-one matchups. You also have Kyron Hudson, who, yeah, there was a lot of talent in that USC wide receiver room, but he had 12 contested catches a season ago and no drops. Tyler Warren was the only one ahead of him in that statistic. And then you have the speedster and Devontae Ross, who is going to be able to stretch the field for safeties to keep themselves honest and then open up running lanes for Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen. So it's that diversity in the passing attack that Penn State hasn't had before that I think makes the difference here for Allar.
Yeah, that's huge. I think they really attacked their weakness in the portal this year. Hudson brings the physicality. Ross has the speed. And, you know, to those skeptics that say, that was at Troy, well, you can't fake foot speed. I mean, that translates no matter where you are. It's the same turf, right? So, he's going to be a burner in the vertical game. Pena was a great slot receiver for Syracuse. He drew some all ACC hype. I'll tell you, they were really upset when he transferred out after spring ball. That was a huge get for Penn State to bolster the room. And then you wonder about if they can hit on some of these former blue chippers that are still on the roster and you're waiting for breakouts. You got a former top 50 recruit in Caden Saunders. And then at tight end, replacing Warren, you have a couple blue chippers there with a 5-star in Olesh and a top 100 with Luke Reynolds. So there's potential there. Not only proven guys from the portal, but potential from the recruiting ranks. So, yeah, I think you're right about that. They attack their perceived weakness and, gives Allar a lot of options there to play with.
And Allar draws a lot of, this was the measure that I didn't get to in that long-winded response, but I think of how Mac Jones was viewed once upon a time as a top 5 pick, and the 49ers were rumored to trade up for him, and he just wowed, and his job was easy. He had guys like Devontae Smith just streaking wide open. How can you not miss them as receivers? But when Amari Evans and Trey Wallace and Keandre Lambert-Smith, for what it's worth, a couple of years back, are blanketed by cornerbacks in one-on-one coverage, they are not doubled. So you really don't have anywhere to go. But when you have the Alabama stable of wide receivers where this guy's running 10 yards wide open and this guy's open 5 yards and creates separation on his own without getting too fancy, Allar would be able to hit those guys, but not when the wide receivers are blanketed. The pocket eventually collapses after you try to hold on to the ball as long as you can. And that's why why his completion percentage looks bad in some games, because he opts to not turn the football over and live to play another down.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I like when you brought up about how against the West Virginias and the Villanovas of the world, they really dominate. But the question is whether they can against the upper echelon. And I have a number to back it up. And I know we're talking receivers, but really Penn State as a program, the last 3 years, they're number 1 in the country against the spread when they are the favorite. When they enter with the talent advantage, when they're the perceived favorite, number 1 in the country, they cover 74% of the time. It's unheard of. And then if you're not into the gambling side of it, the straight up record, 34-2 as the favorite. So when they are the perceived favorite, and they will be in, I think, 11 games this fall, you can maybe argue the road trip to Ohio State just being in Columbus could flip that line. But at least 11 favorite spots this year. They're really the best team in the country when they're the favorite. They take care of business against inferior opponents. And, that's the last hurdle. Can they do that against the Ohio States and the Texases and the SEC teams? So we'll see. But I think it was a necessary upgrade at receiver. Everywhere else on the roster seems to be that playoff tier. ready for a breakthrough. So that's the big question. I think they brought in 3 great guys.
And not to mention, I know you named guys like, so unfortunately, Caden Saunders is going to be dealing with a long-term injury. He says he will bounce back, but we don't have a timeline for what that would look like. But I'm glad you mentioned Luke Reynolds. I think it's fair to say Khalil Dinkins as well in the tight end room. You mentioned other blue chip prospects. Andrew Rapplier is back from injury. So they have 3 options at wide receiver that are reliable. Honestly, 3 options at tight end, and then Singleton and Allen can be used out of the backfield as receivers as well. That is Penn State's biggest strength, is that you can go to any one of them. It's about the quantity of players that Allar has at his disposal, not necessarily the quality, the superstar like a Tyler Warren was a year ago. And I think that helps Penn State, that you have to think about 7, 8 different options at any given time versus just the one.
Yeah. No, and yeah, we're not even talking about what they have in the backfield, which is going to be a great race. I don't think I've ever seen this in my 14 years of doing a preview magazine, that you have not only one guy, but 2 guys chasing the all-time school rushing record. It's going to be Singleton versus Allen there late in November. They could both be racing each other for the school record. Kind of a Mark McGuire, Sammy Sosa, just back and forth contest, but within the same school. I've never seen that. So that'll be cool to monitor. But yeah, we're not even hitting on the strengths. I mean, the offensive line, bringing 4 all-conference guys back. So really, the case in point of why Penn State's a playoff candidate and a national title candidate is, if we're going to spend so much time on one position group as maybe a weakness, you know what I mean? That means the other 10 spots are all solid. So I like what we have with Penn State this year as the Big Ten champ pick.
So I think this is a great segue, because we mentioned Singleton and Allen out of the backfield. You talked about the multiple, basically 80% of Penn State's starting offensive line, which was really starting to peak against the better competition going into the postseason last year, is all back. But there are some groups that, still going, could they end up being a liability if they aren't taken care of? We're going to discuss that coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. Brett, I think it's fair to start with the strengths in this final segment, and then talk about, maybe a weakness or a liability, because you're only as strong as your weakest link. But hitting on Singleton and Allen as that dynamic duo out of the backfield. You also have Quentin Martin, Corey Smith, Cam Wallace. Penn State's depth is there. So if Penn State were to take a hit at running back, you cycle in, they're not going to be as good as Singleton and Allen right out of the gate, but you do have other options to a point where, okay, we don't have to totally drastically, radically change our game plan, because I think this is going to be a run-first team. I know we focused on Allar a lot and what he can do with his arm, but Penn State has one of the best offensive lines, maybe even the best offensive line back for this season, in addition to, yes, the best backfield. I can definitively say that when you have not 1, but 2 stars that passed up on the NFL.
Yeah. In terms of strengths, you have to start with that running back duo. And it's funny, if you look at my preview magazine, you see on the all Big Ten team, it's all 3 Penn Staters at the top. You got quarterback Allar and both the running backs. They're both my first team running backs for the all Big Ten. So I don't think I've ever had that before. But yeah, what a great pair to build around. And they're going to run behind arguably the best line in the country, right up there with Notre Dame. They were 1A, 1B for me this year. But with Notre Dame not in a conference, that puts Penn State number 1 in the Big Ten. So you've got the league's best offensive line, the best running backs, and my number 1 QB entering the season. That's a lot to build around. And then also another great strength is the defensive line. So they're number 1 on both lines of scrimmage for me in the Big Ten. Number 1 O-line, number 1 D-line. And that's even with the loss of Abdul Carter. I mean, that shows you how much talent is stockpiled here in the trenches for Penn State. So that's really the name of the game in the Big Ten is trench play. And I think Penn State has the best lines in the conference.
Well, and you mentioned defensive line. So let me ask about that, because that was a point of emphasis in the offseason, definitely on my show, and then other people started to ask about it too. I mean, you have Zane Durant, you have Deni Dennis-Sutton, Zariah Fisher has been talked about internally by Penn State, by James Franklin, as a breakout candidate. So it's not just, this is one superstar defensive end. No, you have potentially 2 guys that at the end of the day would be on all conference on either side of the line of scrimmage. But it's the depth. It's the depth that's a question mark, because I label Zane Durant, second to Drew Allar, of course. In the secondary, we could talk about Zachy Wheatley with this same framing, as a player that they cannot lose above all else. So how do you see it? If you go further down the depth chart, after denying Dennis Sutton, Zane Duran, Alonzo Ford, Zariah Fisher, are you concerned with what Penn State would have in that rotation or not so much?
No, not so much because I know that they were stuck behind some NFL great players here. I mean, Abdul Carter going number 3 in the draft. These guys are just the next men up. And yeah, you touched on it. I think Dennis Sutton has he's poised for an All-America season of his own. You got Zane Durant. He got a lot of praise from spring ball, and they were saying this might be the best defensive tackle that Franklin's ever had. And you can look at all the NFLers that he has coached here. That is quite the list. So that's huge praise. You don't just see that everywhere, that kind of praise. So that stood out to me. And then you got, Zariah Fisher coming in from the Whippeal out there in Pittsburgh, from Aliquippa. So, that's another 4-star kid, and he's going to fill in at the other end spot, it sounds like. So that's a big 3 to build around. There are up-and-coming stars that are going to emerge. I really trust this defense, and it's year over year, too. And that's several different coordinators. James Franklin continues to open up the Rolodex. It could be the most impressive I've ever seen. I mean, it's just name after name that he's pulling in here to coach this defense. You had Brent Pry for such a long time. You bring in a former head coach, Manny Diaz. You bring a former head coach, Tom Allen. And then once and for all, the final one, Jim Knowles, coming over from Ohio State. He's a Pennsylvanian himself, so he's back in the home state, but probably with a chip on his shoulder. He wants to build another national champion. So, I love this defensive front, this defense as a whole, and, should be one of the best in the country yet again.
Linebacker and secondary, then, if defensive line isn't really that much of a concern to you, and we talked about how offensive line and the ground game just in general are really going to, because winning teams run the football. So it's a good thing that Penn State has that as its staple, because if they're going to be leading in a lot of these games, then they're going to need to run the football. But on the defensive side, people have questions about linebacker. Totally understand. Okay. This is a 4-2-5. So it's really, it's not a defense that, it doesn't have to rely on this insane amount of linebackers. So that, fortunately for Penn State, and what Jim Knowles has always run is that 4-2-5. So this team is really built around its secondary. I like A.J. Harris a lot. I like Zach Wheatley a lot. I like what they have up and coming with Elliott Washington, Davian Collins, even though those starting position battles haven't sorted themselves out yet. If I had to point to one position group that after, in conjunction with maybe defensive tackle depth or defensive line depth overall, is safety. Safety, kind of outside of Zach Wheatley. That's another player where Penn State just can't afford to lose him this season because I don't know what they have. Sure, there's guys that could break out. They're former 4-stars, but we still haven't seen a whole lot of them to this point to know and say, we know that we're going to get XYZ out of a Dejon Lane. Or King Mack, who was at Penn State, then transferred out to Alabama, then back to Penn State. We truly don't know what we're going to get from them if their role increases unexpectedly.
Yeah, for sure. And with King Mack, I'm not even sure where you put him. Is he a nickel? Is he a safety?
He's battling for both, actually.
Yeah, there you go. I guess it's a good thing. He's a do-it-all guy and has experience not only in the Power 4 level, but here exactly at Penn State. So Elliott Washington, I got big reviews from over the winter and spring. They called him the winter workout warrior. Yep. So I think he's poised for a breakout. But you're replacing a couple starters in that secondary. That's huge. But I'll say that, coming out of spring, I had 2 spots circled on Penn State as potential questions, and it was slot receiver, and it was getting another linebacker in the building, and they went out and signed both. We already talked about Trevor Pena coming from Syracuse, all ACC starter. But then at linebacker, they got UNC starting backer Amari Campbell. So
conference.
I don't even know where he fits into the updated 2 deep, but just bringing in a proven Power 4 starter, that can only help. So, plus, you have a high upside guy with LeVar Arrington, too. LeVar Arrington the second, whatever, 2.0, whatever you want to call him. And a name like that of a legend, that's going to catch some attention. So I like the linebackers, despite losing Kobe King. And I still like the secondary. Maybe there's more openings there, like you hit on, just because of some departing starters. But you got to like what they have in the building.
At cornerback, and again, maybe you can just get your best defensive backs on the field at the end of the day. Maybe that's what they ultimately settle on, because I have no I have no confidence issues when it comes to AJ Harris breaking out and being all conference, all American. I'm not familiar with all of the best cornerbacks this upcoming season quite yet, but I think AJ Harris, being discussed as a potential first round pick, certainly qualifies him as a top 5 cornerback going into this season, which kind of borders him on that All America status. And then with that being said, Elliot Washington, as we've discussed, is just a freak athlete. Davian Collins will certainly be a name to know. Darius Dixon, Kenny Wosley get mentioned a lot as backup players, young newcomers to this Penn State team. But unprovoked, Jim Knowles, who we talk about as an expert defensive coordinator, just casually mentions them. Who's a guy that's really stood out to you? Kenny Wosley. Darius Dixon, he's been one of the best true freshmen I've ever seen in my time coaching football. So if you're Penn State, you just got to feel good about what you have at defensive back overall, even though there might be some concerns at safety specifically.
Yeah, that's great praise, and that might have come after the release of my preview magazine. So I'm feeling better about it, better about the Penn State pick now after hearing Knowles speak. And yeah, I mean, if you look at it in my national units rankings, I've got Penn State as the #1 defensive line in the country. I've got them as the #2 secondary in the country, and then the linebackers are still a top 12. I got them 12th in the country. So I mean, a rare trio where all 3 units are in my top 15 of my national units. That's a great sign. Several guys made the All-American team for me here in the preseason with Dennis Sutton and A.J. Harris and Wheatley and Zane Durant. I mean, that they might have the national lead there with 4. So a lot to like from Penn State. I mean, just hearing those quotes just puts more fuel on the hype train. I'll leave you with one last note here is that in the book, I have not only the 5-year high school recruiting rankings and the 2-year transfer, but I like to also include the mock NFL draft picks for next year, see who's really on the roster currently. And I know it's still early for a mock draft, but it's still a good indicator. Penn State's #1 in the country there with 12 mock draft picks for next year. So a lot of guys could have gone pro. They're back, and that's reflected in this mock 2026. So, I mean, and a lot of those are on defense. So you have one of the best defenses in the country again. There's a proven track record here, and I think you'll see it again.
Brett Ciancia, the founder of Pick Six Previews. You can find his work over at pick6previews.com or follow his work over on X so you can see his entire college football preview for this upcoming season. And I think it's definitely worth it when he has been the #1 most accurate college football expert for a decade. It's certainly worth checking out. Brett, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate the insight and giving some more confidence and credence to what this Penn State team has to offer for this upcoming season.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Zach, anytime, and good luck, Penn State. Hopefully I get to meet a lot of you up there at that whiteout game. We'll see.